How some people don't just fall in love with you, they attach to your energy, not your body, not your words, but something deeper, something you can't see, yet they react to it like it's oxygen. What if I told you that your sexual energy was never just physical, but spiritual, creative, even God-given? And what if the very people who tried to control you weren't drawn to you by accident, but because they felt something powerful inside you that they don't have within themselves? In this video, we're going to uncover why certain narcissistic personalities seem almost obsessed, why the connection feels intoxicating at first, and why it turns into a battle for power. Stay with me until the end, because the final truth might completely change how you see your past relationships and yourself. And if this message speaks to something you've felt but never had words for, don't just watch silently, subscribe and leave a comment saying, "See it now." Let's begin. They saw your light before you did. That is where this story really begins. Long before you understood your own depth, your warmth, your emotional intensity, someone else noticed it. Demonic narcissists are not intuitive in a loving way, but they are highly sensitive to opportunity. They scan for emotional supply the way a predator scans for movement in the dark. And when they meet an empath, they feel something different. It is not just attraction, it is not just chemistry, it is energy. An empath's sexual energy is layered. It carries presence, emotional safety, devotion, imagination, and the ability to bond deeply. It is creative and alive. But most empaths do not walk around thinking, "I have powerful energy." They simply believe they love deeply. They believe they care strongly. They believe everyone connects this way. The narcissist knows better. They recognize that what feels normal to you is rare. Before you ever questioned your worth, they sensed your value. Before you understood how intense your emotional presence could be, they were already leaning toward it. Narcissistic personalities often feel internally empty, disconnected, or restless. So when they encounter someone whose energy feels warm, grounded, and expansive, it is almost shocking to them. They may not call it God-given. They may not label it spiritual, but they feel it. It feels stabilizing, it feels intoxicating, it feels powerful. And because they feel it so strongly, they move quickly. This is why the connection can feel instant. They mirror you. They match your intensity. They talk about destiny, soulmates, deep bonds. It feels like they see you in a way no one else ever has. And in a way they do. They see your light. The difference is, they see it as something to access, not something to protect. While you are experiencing emotional connection, they are calculating emotional supply. While you are opening your heart, they are measuring how much validation, devotion, and energy flows toward them. What makes this dynamic so confusing is that you often discover your power only after the damage is done. You start realizing how deeply you bond, how strongly you love, how magnetic your presence can be. You begin to understand that your sexual energy is not just physical attraction. It is emotional depth. It is spiritual warmth. It is the ability to make someone feel chosen. And that realization usually comes after you have felt drained, confused, or betrayed. They recognized your energy before you did because they were searching for it. You were simply being it. That is the difference. And once you truly understand that your energy is valuable, intentional, and sacred, you stop offering it unconsciously. You become aware. You become selective. And that awareness changes everything. Sexual energy for an empath is far more than physical attraction. It is a spiritual life force. It is creative, deeply emotional, and rooted in connection. When an empath bonds with someone intimately, they are not just sharing a body, they are sharing presence, imagination, trust, and devotion. Their energy carries warmth. It carries healing. It carries the desire to merge on a soul level. There is vulnerability in it, and there is sincerity. This kind of energy does not come from performance. It comes from authenticity. It flows naturally because the empath feels safe enough to open, to give, and to connect without armor. This is why intimacy, for an empath, can feel sacred. It is creative because it inspires ideas, passion, and emotional expansion. It is healing because it reassures, affirms, and strengthens emotional bonds. It is bonding because it creates attachment that is layered and meaningful. When an empath connects intimately, they are offering their inner world. They are saying, without words, I trust you with something precious. That depth makes their energy powerful. Now contrast that with a narcissist operating from a wounded ego. Beneath the confidence, beneath the charm, there is often insecurity, emptiness, and a constant need for validation. When they encounter an empath's sexual energy, it does not feel sacred to them. It feels potent. It feels like high-grade fuel. It regulates their insecurity. It soothes their internal chaos. It boosts their sense of power. In the presence of that warmth and devotion, they feel elevated. But here is the crucial difference. The empath seeks intimacy. The narcissist seeks access. The empath wants to bond, to share, to create closeness. The narcissist wants to absorb, to control, to secure a steady stream of admiration and emotional supply. What feels like connection to one feels like acquisition to the other. They don't crave the vulnerability for mutual growth. They crave what that vulnerability gives them. They are drawn to the intensity, to the way an empath can make them feel chosen, admired, desired. It becomes addictive because it temporarily fills a void they cannot fill themselves. The empath's sexual energy becomes a source of ego reinforcement, and once they realize how stabilizing it feels, they want more of it. This is why the dynamic can feel draining. When intimacy is not mutual, when one person is pouring from the soul and the other is consuming from the ego, imbalance forms quickly. The empath may feel deeply attached, believing the connection is rare and profound. The narcissist feels attached too, but for a different reason. Not because they cherish the bond, but because they depend on the supply. Understanding this difference changes everything. Your sexual energy is not weakness. It is not naivety. It is creative life force. It is emotional depth. And when it is shared with someone capable of true intimacy, it builds something beautiful. But when it is accessed by someone seeking fuel instead of connection, it becomes a source of imbalance. Recognizing that distinction is the beginning of reclaiming your power. When we speak about something being God-given, we are not just using religious language. We are describing something innate, untouched, and deeply authentic. The God-given aspect of an empath's sexual energy represents purity of intention, emotional honesty, and sacred connection. It is not manipulative. It is not calculated. It flows from a place of truth. This kind of energy carries innocence and strength at the same time. It does not beg for validation. It simply exists as a natural expression of who you are, and that is exactly why it becomes a target. Narcissistic personalities are often driven by a hidden emptiness. Beneath the surface confidence, beneath the charm and control, there is a fragile sense of self. They build identities around performance, admiration, and external validation because internally they feel unstable. When they encounter someone operating from authentic, grounded energy, it feels unfamiliar and powerful. The empath's presence is not dependent on applause. Their warmth does not need an audience. Their devotion is not a strategy. That kind of authenticity exposes the narcissist's inner void without a single word being spoken. They do not attack weakness. They attack what threatens their emptiness. This is an important distinction. Narcissists are not drawn to people who are powerless. They are drawn to people who carry something valuable, something alive, something real. The divine aspect of an empath's energy represents wholeness. Even if the empath does not fully see it yet, there is a depth within them that cannot be faked. They bond sincerely. They love sincerely. They feel sincerely. That sincerity has weight. And to someone who operates from ego defense, it feels both attractive and threatening at the same time. When something threatens a narcissist's internal narrative, they attempt to dominate it. If they can control it, they do not have to feel inferior to it. If they can possess it, they do not have to confront their lack of it. This is why the dynamic often begins with intense admiration. They may praise your depth, your purity, your loyalty. They may call you rare, different, unlike anyone else. In those early stages, it feels like appreciation. But underneath that admiration is assessment. They are studying what makes you shine. The divine quality in an empath often shows up as emotional consistency. They can sit with difficult feelings. They can offer reassurance. They can create safety and intimacy. They are not playing roles, they are being themselves. For someone who constantly performs to secure love, this is both mesmerizing and destabilizing. The narcissist senses that this kind of authenticity cannot be manufactured. It must be inherent, and instead of being inspired to grow, they often choose to conquer. Domination becomes a way to silence the threat. If they can make you doubt your purity, they reduce the contrast between your light and their emptiness. If they can create insecurity in you, they feel less exposed. If they can control your sexual energy, your affection, your devotion, they feel powerful instead of lacking. Slowly, the dynamic shifts. What once felt sacred begins to feel confusing. The empath may notice subtle criticism, emotional withdrawal, or manipulation. These tactics are not random. They are attempts to destabilize what was once strong. There is also a deeper psychological layer at play. When someone lacks a stable sense of self, they often oscillate between idealizing and devaluing others. At first, the divine energy is idealized. It is placed on a pedestal. It feels magical. But as attachment deepens, the narcissist's insecurity surfaces. Instead of confronting their own inner wounds, they project discomfort outward. The same qualities that once fascinated them now become triggers. Your emotional depth may be labeled too intense. Your sincerity may be called naive. Your devotion may be dismissed as clingy. This reversal is not about your energy changing. It is about their discomfort increasing. Divine energy, by nature, does not need to dominate. It does not compete. It does not perform. That quiet confidence can feel threatening to someone whose entire identity depends on control. The narcissist senses that your value is not dependent on them, and that realization challenges their need to feel superior. So rather than nurture what is sacred, they attempt to overpower it. This is why many empaths feel spiritually attacked rather than simply mistreated. It feels like something deeper than personality conflict. It feels like an attempt to dim your light. That feeling arises because the dynamic is not just about attraction. It is about contrast. Light naturally exposes shadow. Authenticity naturally exposes performance. Purity naturally exposes manipulation. When two energies meet, one grounded and one defensive, tension is inevitable. Yet the truth remains powerful. If something in you can threaten emptiness, it means it carries substance. If your presence can destabilize someone who survives on ego, it means your energy is rooted in something real. The problem was never your purity. The problem was placing sacred energy in hands that were not prepared to honor it. Understanding this reframes the narrative. You were not targeted because you were weak. You were targeted because you were strong in a way that did not rely on dominance. You carried connection without calculation. You offered intimacy without strategy. And for someone who lacks inner wholeness, that kind of divine presence feels overwhelming. The lesson is not to dim your light. It is to protect it. Divine energy thrives in environments of mutual respect, emotional maturity, and shared vulnerability. It does not survive long under control or manipulation. When you recognize that they attacked what they envied, you stop internalizing the damage. You see the dynamic clearly. They did not attempt to dominate you because you were less. They attempted to dominate you because your authenticity reminded them of everything they were not willing to face within themselves. Addiction to emotional intensity does not begin with the body. It begins with the nervous system. It begins with how two people feel in each other's presence. Empaths do not experience intimacy as something casual or surface level. When they connect, they merge emotionally. Their attention becomes focused. Their empathy deepens. Their walls soften. They are not just present physically, they are present psychologically. They feel the other person's mood, tone, breathing, and unspoken needs. This kind of emotional merging creates depth, and that depth creates imprinting. Psychological imprinting happens when an experience becomes emotionally charged and meaningful. The brain links pleasure, connection, and validation together. For an empath, intimacy often feels layered with meaning. It feels spiritual, bonded, and sincere. They are not just sharing touch, they are sharing trust. And because they attach emotionally, the memory of that connection becomes strong and lasting. It carries weight, it carries narrative, it carries hope. Now consider how this intensity affects someone with narcissistic traits. Narcissists often live in a constant search for validation. Beneath the surface confidence, there is a fragile ego that requires reinforcement. They need to feel admired, chosen, desired, and superior. When an empath merges emotionally, the narcissist experiences something extremely powerful. They feel deeply seen. They feel prioritized. They feel like the center of someone's emotional universe. That experience can be intoxicating, but the addiction is not to the body itself. It is to the emotional reaction the body creates. It is to the admiration in your eyes. It is to the way you focus completely on them. It is to the surrender of your guard, the trust in your voice, the softness in your energy. All of these signals communicate importance. To a wounded ego, importance equals worth, and when they feel that worth reflected through you, it becomes addictive. This is why the dynamic can escalate quickly. The narcissist senses how deeply you bond. They sense that your attachment is genuine. That knowledge feeds their ego. It tells them they are powerful, magnetic, unforgettable. The more intensely you merge, the stronger the reinforcement becomes. Over time, they begin to associate intimacy with ego elevation. It becomes less about closeness and more about supply. Ego food is subtle. It does not look like hunger at first. It looks like passion. It looks like chemistry. It looks like mutual desire. But underneath, there is a pattern forming. The narcissist begins to crave the feeling of being emotionally worshipped. They crave the intensity of your attachment. They crave the way your energy stabilizes their insecurity. And because that feeling is so regulating for them, they return to it again and again. What makes this addiction complicated is that it is not consciously planned. Many narcissistic individuals are not sitting there thinking, I will feed on this. Instead, they are responding to the relief they feel in your presence. When they feel admired, their anxiety decreases. When they feel desired, their self-doubt quiets. When they feel emotionally prioritized, their internal emptiness softens. Your emotional intensity becomes a psychological sedative. However, addiction changes behavior. When someone depends on a source for regulation, they begin to fear losing it. This is where control can enter. They may test your loyalty. They may provoke jealousy to confirm your attachment. They may withdraw affection temporarily to see how strongly you chase. Each reaction you give becomes proof of their importance. Each emotional response becomes more ego reinforcement. Meanwhile, the empath is experiencing something very different. They believe the intensity means depth. They believe the emotional highs signal true connection. They interpret the bonding as sacred, and because they attach sincerely, they often invest more over time. But while the empath deepens connection, the narcissist deepens dependency on validation. The cycle becomes powerful. Intense intimacy creates strong emotional highs. Emotional highs create stronger imprinting. Stronger imprinting increases attachment. Increased attachment increases validation, and validation feeds the ego. Over time, the narcissist may begin to associate you specifically with that emotional high, not because of who you are internally, but because of how you make them feel about themselves. When access to that intensity is threatened, the reaction can be dramatic. Withdrawal of supply feels like withdrawal of worth. This is why some narcissistic individuals react with panic, anger, or sudden attempts to reconnect when an empath pulls away. They are not only losing a partner, they are losing a mirror that reflects an elevated version of themselves. Understanding this dynamic reframes the experience. It was never just about physical attraction, it was about emotional amplification. Your ability to merge, to feel deeply, to surrender sincerely created a powerful psychological effect. That effect became addictive to someone whose ego relies on external reinforcement. Recognizing this is empowering. It shows that your intensity is not foolishness, it is capacity. It shows that your depth is not weakness, it is strength. The key difference is where that energy is placed. In mutual intimacy, emotional intensity builds trust and growth. In ego-driven dynamics, it becomes fuel for someone else's insecurity. Addiction to emotional intensity thrives in imbalance. Healing begins when intensity is paired with reciprocity, emotional maturity, and shared vulnerability. When both people seek connection instead of validation, intensity transforms from ego food into genuine bonding. And that shift changes everything. Power through possession is one of the most subtle, yet destructive dynamics in a relationship with a demonic narcissist. To them, sexual bonding is never simply intimacy. It is not about connection, vulnerability, or mutual pleasure. In the narcissist's mindset, sexual energy is currency, a form of ownership, a tool to assert dominance, and a way to manipulate perception. When they gain access to an empath's sexual energy, they experience something that feels like control over identity itself. It is as though sharing intimacy allows them to not only possess a body, but also to imprint themselves upon the soul. For narcissists who operate from a fractured, ego-driven sense of self, this illusion of control becomes intoxicating. They are drawn to it, and they escalate quickly once they feel its power. The first stage of this escalation often appears as what people call love bombing. Suddenly, the empath is inundated with attention, praise, gifts, and devotion. Everything feels intense and overwhelming, but the intention behind it is not connection, it is strategic. The narcissist is creating a sense of dependency. By overwhelming the empath with admiration and affection, they foster emotional attachment before the empath can establish boundaries or understand the true intent. This intense focus makes the empath feel special, unique, even chosen. But the underlying purpose is to establish possession. By drawing the empath in emotionally and sexually, the narcissist creates a strong psychological imprint that will later be used to manipulate, control, or extract energy. Soon after, the narcissist introduces soulmate narratives. These stories are not about genuine connection, they are about creating obligation and a sense of inevitability. They frame the relationship as fated, spiritual, or cosmic, making the empath believe that the bond is sacred and unbreakable. This tactic deepens the emotional attachment while simultaneously masking the narcissist's intent to control. The empath may start to feel that walking away is impossible or that breaking the bond would defy destiny itself. This is strategic attachment at its core. The narcissist is using belief, narrative, and spiritual framing to tether the empath to them psychologically, making them more vulnerable to manipulation and more likely to share energy unconditionally. Another layer of escalation often involves spiritual destiny talk. Demonic narcissists are skilled at exploiting the empath's sense of purpose and spiritual awareness. They may claim that the empath is uniquely equipped to fulfill a cosmic role, that their sexual energy is part of a divine plan, or that they are together for reasons beyond human comprehension. For the empath, this language resonates deeply because it frames sexual and emotional sharing as sacred and meaningful. The narcissist, however, is less concerned with truth than with leverage. By framing sexual energy as divinely significant, they create an aura of obligation. The empath may feel that withholding intimacy or setting boundaries is a betrayal not just of the relationship, but of a spiritual calling. In this way, narcissistic possession becomes intertwined with the empath's sense of purpose. At the core, this dynamic is about identity control. The narcissist believes that access to sexual energy allows them to shape the empath's perception of self. They use intimacy to anchor the empath emotionally, making their presence feel essential. When an empath merges during intimacy, the narcissist experiences a sense of ownership over their emotional and spiritual energy. It becomes ego food, a validation of power, and a source of regulation for their own insecurities. The more the empath gives, the more the narcissist reinforces their perception of dominance and significance. This dynamic can be invisible to the empath because it often begins under the guise of affection, admiration, and spiritual alignment. The danger is that this possession feels mutual at first. The empath experiences connection, warmth, and seemingly profound intimacy, while the narcissist experiences control, masters love. The merging of sexual energy, emotional vulnerability, and psychological influence creates a high-intensity dynamic that is hard to disentangle. The empath may not even recognize the manipulative patterns because they are so intertwined with their own capacity for love and openness. Over time, however, the imbalance becomes clear. The narcissist access is relentless, the demands subtle but constant, and the energy flow predominantly one-sided. Escalation is a predictable pattern. It often starts with excessive admiration, moves into spiritual or cosmic narratives, and then into manipulation that reinforces dependency. Narcissists may introduce guilt, fear of loss, or subtle threats to ensure that access to sexual and emotional energy continues uninterrupted. They may leverage their perception of the empath's devotion to ensure compliance or emotional surrender. And all of this occurs without overt aggression. The control is psychological, strategic, and insidious. By framing possession as love, destiny, or spiritual alignment, the narcissist makes the empath's energy a tool rather than a shared resource. Recognizing this pattern is critical for empaths seeking to protect themselves. Power through possession is not about the sexual act itself, it is about access to life force, emotional depth, and spiritual energy. The narcissist's escalation is intentional, not accidental. Love bombing, soulmate narratives, and spiritual destiny talk are tactics designed to secure attachment and reinforce identity control. When empaths understand this, they can begin to differentiate genuine intimacy from strategic manipulation. They can reclaim boundaries, recognize exploitative patterns, and reframe sexual energy as sacred rather than consumable. Ultimately, the lesson is that sexual energy should never be a currency for control. It is a sacred, life-giving force. When it is treated as a tool for possession, the connection becomes toxic, and the empath loses not only energy but clarity, autonomy, and sometimes even a sense of self. Understanding the narcissist's mindset transforms the empath's perspective. It is no longer a question of whether they are loved, but whether their energy is being respected. Power through possession is subtle, strategic, and intense, but awareness dismantles the illusion. Once the dynamic is seen clearly, the empath can reclaim their energy, their intimacy, and their identity. The freedom comes not from confrontation alone, but from understanding that your sexual energy is yours, sacred and untouchable except by those worthy of truly mutual connection. They feed on contrast. This is one of the most profound dynamics in the relationship between a demonic narcissist and an empath, yet it is subtle enough that it can go unnoticed for a long time. The empath's natural softness, their emotional openness, their ability to feel deeply and share vulnerably becomes a mirror reflecting everything the narcissist lacks. Where the empath exudes warmth, patience, and emotional intelligence, the narcissist often carries emptiness, insecurity, and a fragile sense of self. This contrast is magnetic to the narcissist, not because it inspires growth, but because it highlights the absence of those qualities in themselves. They do not see your depth as something to admire for its own sake. They see it as a resource, something to consume, imitate, or manipulate in order to soothe their inner void. Your emotional depth becomes impossible for them to ignore. When you are present and emotionally available, you shine with authenticity and consistency. You bring safety, trust, and genuine care. You love without calculation, you listen without judgment, and you give without expectation. For the narcissist who thrives on control, performance, and external validation, this is both alluring and threatening. All at once, they are drawn to your energy and unsettled by it. They cannot replicate it, they cannot manufacture it, and that reality feels uncomfortable to their ego. The empath becomes a mirror of what they are not, reflecting their limitations, their insecurities, and the emotional void they spend a lifetime trying to fill. This dynamic of contrast is a double-edged sword. On one side, the empath embodies everything that is genuine and life-giving, creating an emotional high that feels intoxicating to the narcissist. On the other, the same qualities expose their emptiness. Because they cannot integrate or acknowledge the light within you, their response is often compulsive. They become addicted to the way your energy makes them feel alive while simultaneously fearing it. That combination, attraction, envy, and fear, creates obsession. You become not just a person they desire, but a source of psychological stimulation, a mirror they cannot turn away from, and a drug they feel compelled to consume. The empathy you bring is a reflection of emotional and spiritual health, patience, and authentic love. It operates on a frequency that resonates with truth and depth. For the narcissist, who may live in constant internal chaos, unpredictability, and need for control, being around that energy is both exhilarating and destabilizing. They are drawn to it because it temporarily regulates their inner emptiness. Your presence makes them feel whole for a fleeting moment, like a mirror showing them an alternate version of themselves where they are capable of genuine connection and compassion. That fleeting sense of completeness becomes addictive. They chase it, manipulate it, and sometimes destroy it, not out of malice alone, but out of desperation to maintain access. Yet while they consume this contrast, they cannot absorb it without consequence. Your softness and emotional depth remain yours, unaltered by their attempts to take or dominate. But their obsession grows because the more they see your authenticity, the more exposed their deficiencies feel. They are constantly reminded of what they lack: the ability to love without control, to bond without ego, to trust without fear. That exposure triggers both fascination and compulsion, and this is where the empath's energy functions as a drug. Each interaction reinforces their need for that emotional high, whether through intimacy, validation, or the mimicry of connection. In practical terms, this is why relationships with narcissists often feel like an emotional roller coaster. There are highs when they mirror your emotions, when they temporarily align with your energy, or when they experience emotional intimacy. There are lows when the contrast becomes unbearable for them, when envy, insecurity, or fear of inadequacy triggers manipulation, withdrawal, or control tactics. The empath, naturally generous and trusting, may interpret these cycles as proof of emotional depth or passion, not realizing the obsession is fueled by contrast rather than true mutuality. The danger of this dynamic is that it often keeps the empath engaged longer than they should be. Because the narcissist is so captivated by the light they cannot own, the empath becomes a constant source of psychological stimulation, maintaining the narcissist's addiction to the contrast. And the more intensely the empath feels, the more the narcissist seeks it. Emotional highs become addictive, and emotional lows are attempts to regain control or provoke a response. The empath, in turn, may feel compelled to bridge the gap, to nurture, and to soothe, unaware that this only feeds the pattern. Recognizing this contrast is empowering. It reveals that your depth is a strength, not a liability. It explains why certain individuals respond to you with obsession rather than respect. The dynamic is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of theirs. You are not weak because they are drawn to you. You are powerful because they cannot replicate your energy. The narcissist's fixation is an external symptom of their internal void, a craving for what they cannot generate within themselves. When an empath understands this, boundaries become essential. Protecting emotional and sexual energy is not selfish, it is self-preservation. Your depth is sacred, and the narcissist's obsession is a symptom of their imbalance, not a measure of your value. Recognizing the contrast allows empaths to disengage, reclaim autonomy, and redirect energy toward relationships that are reciprocal rather than compulsive. Your softness, your empathy, your ability to connect emotionally, these are strengths. They are lights that illuminate the darkness around you, but they only work when you control who has access to them. Ultimately, feeding on contrast is the narcissist's pattern, not the empath's failure. Awareness dismantles the illusion of mutuality, exposing the reality you are both mirror and drug, but only you have the choice of how your energy is shared. Understanding this dynamic transforms the empath from a passive participant into a conscious guardian of their energy. Your light is not theirs to consume, it is yours to honor, nurture, and protect. And once that understanding settles, freedom from obsession becomes possible, along with clarity, strength, and the ability to engage in connections that are truly mutual. The dynamic between a demonic narcissist and an empath often carries a weight that goes beyond simple emotional or psychological imbalance. When viewed through a spiritual lens, it can feel like a battlefield, a war of energies rather than a conflict of personalities. This is why many empaths describe these relationships as draining, confusing, and almost otherworldly in intensity. The spiritual warfare narrative becomes clear when we understand the fundamental difference in the approach of the two energies involved. On one side, the empath seeks union. They approach intimacy, connection, and bonding with sincerity, vulnerability, and a desire for mutual growth. Their goal is alignment, emotional resonance, and shared presence. They do not seek to dominate or control. Their power lies in openness, authenticity, and the ability to feel deeply. Their energy radiates generosity of the heart, which in itself is magnetic and transformative. On the other side, the narcissist seeks dominance. Their approach to relationships, including sexual and emotional bonding, is not about mutuality. It is about acquisition. It is about control. They desire access, compliance, admiration, and validation. They do not connect with an intention to grow or align. They consume with an intention to stabilize their own fragile sense of self. This fundamental opposition creates tension that can feel overwhelming, chaotic, and destructive to the empath. One energy is expansive, giving, and life-affirming, while the other is insatiable, taking, and draining. This imbalance is not always immediately obvious because narcissists often cloak their intentions under charm, charisma, and intense attention. Early on, the connection may feel electric, magnetic, and profound. But beneath the surface, there is a subtle, insidious pattern emerging. When an empath's life force, vulnerability, and trust are met by the narcissist's need for control, the interaction becomes a battlefield. It is not physical warfare, nor is it necessarily verbal. It is energetic. The empath opens, offering their emotional and spiritual energy, hoping for reciprocity, safety, and union. The narcissist absorbs, manipulates, and redirects that energy to meet their own needs. The empath may feel initially exhilarated by the attention, the intensity, and the perceived connection. They may feel seen and understood in ways they have never experienced before. This is part of why the relationship can be so addictive, so compelling, and so difficult to exit. The more the empath gives, the more the narcissist consumes, and the more imbalance grows. The demonic feeling that often accompanies these relationships arises precisely because of this dynamic. It is not literal demonic possession, but it feels like an external force draining the empath's vitality. Their energy is extracted in a way that is both subtle and profound. The empath may experience chronic exhaustion, anxiety, or emotional confusion without immediately understanding why. Their warmth, vulnerability, and emotional intelligence, which are normally sources of connection and healing, become channels through which the narcissist gains psychological sustenance. This creates a sense of being devoured rather than loved. The empath is left questioning their own perceptions, feeling powerless despite their own inherent strength, and wondering why something that should feel natural and nurturing instead feels consuming. Spiritual warfare in this context also highlights the difference between alignment and control. An empath thrives in environments where energy is shared, boundaries are respected, and mutual growth is possible. Their spiritual and emotional energy is a gift meant to nurture, heal, and connect. The narcissist, however, is allergic to alignment because it exposes their own void. They seek to dominate, to claim, and to feed on what they cannot produce themselves. They thrive in imbalance because it reinforces their sense of superiority, even temporarily, and alleviates the internal discomfort that comes from their lack of authentic connection. The empath's openness, in contrast, illuminates the emptiness within them, triggering the need to consume, control, or destabilize. Another component of this spiritual warfare narrative is the sense of inevitability and intensity that often accompanies the interactions. Emotional highs feel electric, even transcendental, while emotional lows feel catastrophic. This rhythm mimics battle, with moments of apparent alignment and connection interrupted by periods of tension, withdrawal, or manipulation. The empath may interpret the highs as signs of deep love or spiritual synchronicity, while the lows reveal the predatory or consuming patterns of the narcissist. The back and forth creates a cycle that mirrors the experience of being on a battlefield: constant vigilance, heightened emotional awareness, and an exhausting sense of responsibility for outcomes beyond one's control. The spiritual aspect of the dynamic also emphasizes the importance of boundaries and discernment. The empath's sensitivity and openness, while beautiful and powerful, make them vulnerable to consumption. Recognizing the energy imbalance is the first step in reclaiming autonomy. Spiritual warfare is not about defeating the narcissist, it is about understanding the energetic dynamics at play, seeing the manipulative patterns for what they are, and reclaiming the space that is inherently yours. By distinguishing between union and domination, the empath can begin to protect their energy, focus on genuine connection, and disengage from those who seek to drain rather than nurture. Ultimately, the spiritual warfare narrative is a story of contrast between energies, one seeking union, the other seeking dominance, one connecting, the other consuming. The empath's role is not to fight, but to observe, understand, and reclaim their life force. Awareness transforms what once felt demonic into clarity, helping the empath see that the draining effects were never a reflection of their value, but a reflection of the narcissist's insatiable need. By understanding the battlefield, empaths gain the ability to reclaim their energy, maintain emotional sovereignty, and engage only in relationships that are reciprocal and life-affirming. This awareness turns what felt like spiritual warfare into a journey of empowerment, self-realization, and protection, allowing the empath to harness their God-given energy without fear of it being consumed. The moment an empath begins to detach, to reclaim their emotional and sexual energy, the dynamic with a narcissist changes instantly and dramatically. For a long time, the narcissist has relied on access to your energy as a source of supply, a way to regulate their fragile ego, and a method of reinforcing their sense of power. When that access is interrupted, when the empath consciously sets boundaries, detaches emotionally, or reclaims their sexual and spiritual energy, the narcissist experiences a sudden, destabilizing loss. This loss is not simply the absence of intimacy or attention, it is a withdrawal from something they have come to rely on as fuel. The energy you have shared, often given freely and sincerely, has sustained their identity. When it is removed, the control they have cultivated begins to unravel, and the patterns they depended on are broken. This is why panic sets in so quickly. Narcissists operate on a system of supply. Emotional energy, sexual attention, admiration, and validation form the foundation of their psychological stability. When an empath is attached, open, and vulnerable, the narcissist has a steady stream of reinforcement. They do not just enjoy it, they require it to maintain equilibrium. Your emotional presence makes them feel seen, powerful, and significant. Your sexual energy, particularly when offered with vulnerability and devotion, becomes an ego stabilizer, a mirror in which they see themselves as desirable, important, and in control. The moment that energy is no longer available, they feel exposed and destabilized. The absence triggers panic because it is not just a loss of connection, it is a direct confrontation with their internal emptiness. For someone who depends on external validation to survive emotionally, this withdrawal feels catastrophic. This panic often manifests in classic narcissistic behaviors. Hoovering is a frequent response where the narcissist attempts to pull the empath back in through charm, manipulation, or false promises. The goal is simple: regain access to the supply that has been cut off. They may employ intense affection, declarations of love, or emotional appeals, all designed to make the empath question their decision to withdraw. These attempts are strategic, targeting the vulnerabilities that once allowed the narcissist access to energy. They are not gestures of genuine love or reconciliation, they are attempts to restore control and re-establish the flow of supply. At the same time, rage often surfaces. When charm and manipulation fail, narcissists may become angry, aggressive, or vindictive. This anger is a reflection of their inner chaos. The panic of lost supply triggers a fight response, as they attempt to assert dominance and regain the upper hand. Emotional outbursts, blaming, and threats are all tactics designed to destabilize the empath, to provoke fear or guilt, and to make the empath return to the dynamic that once fed them. This rage is not about justice or fairness, it is about survival from the narcissist's perspective. They cannot function as usual without access to the energy they have come to depend on, and the only way they know to restore stability is through control and coercion. Smear campaigns and reputation attacks are another common response when the empath resists hoovering attempts. If access to the empath's energy cannot be regained through charm, emotional appeals, or intimidation, the narcissist may attempt to damage the empath's social or professional standing. The goal is to punish the empath for reclaiming their autonomy and to warn others against supporting them. Smearing reinforces the narcissist's illusion of power, even as their internal sense of stability is compromised. It is an external attempt to control perception and regain a sense of dominance when internal control has been lost. All of these behaviors reflect what can be called withdrawal symptoms. Just as an addict experiences physical and emotional distress when cut off from a substance, the narcissist experiences emotional turmoil when cut off from the empath's energy. Anxiety, agitation, obsessive thoughts, and compulsive attempts to regain supply are common responses. This is not conscious or intentional in the sense of strategy alone, it is also physiological. Narcissists have become conditioned to rely on the empath's energy as a regulator of their emotions, their sense of identity, and their perceived self-worth. Without it, they feel depleted, anxious, and unstable. This explains the intensity and often extreme nature of their reactions when an empath reclaims their energy. From the empath's perspective, these responses can feel shocking, overwhelming, and even frightening. What once seemed like a loving or intense connection may now feel manipulative, punishing, and predatory. The key to understanding this dynamic is recognizing that the narcissist's panic is not about you personally. It is about their loss of supply, their inability to regulate their internal state without external validation, and the collapse of control they once relied on. Once the empath reclaims their emotional and sexual energy, the narcissist no longer has the familiar anchors they used to feel whole. The panic, rage, hoovering, and smear tactics are all manifestations of that internal collapse projected outward. This dynamic also highlights the importance of boundaries and conscious detachment. When an empath understands that their energy has been misused as supply, they can anticipate the narcissist's responses and prepare accordingly. Emotional and spiritual reclamation is not merely a matter of refusing to give, it is an assertion of autonomy, identity, and sacred energy. The empath learns to recognize that the intensity of the narcissist's reactions is proportional to the value the narcissist placed on their access, not on the empath's worth as a person. This understanding allows the empath to maintain clarity, avoid manipulation, and protect their energy effectively. They confuse sacred with power. This is one of the most misunderstood and insidious aspects of the dynamic between a narcissist and an empath. To the narcissist, an empath's sexual and emotional energy is magnetic, intoxicating, and unlike anything they have encountered. But instead of seeing it for what it truly is, a God-given expression of vulnerability, depth, and authenticity, they misinterpret it as power they can claim, manipulate, or dominate. They feel as though they have conquered something remarkable, not realizing that what they experienced was not a challenge to overcome or a trophy to possess, but a sacred trust extended in genuine connection. Their perception is distorted by ego. They equate the empath's openness and emotional depth with something to be won or controlled, rather than recognizing it as an offering of energy and intimacy that can only exist in mutual respect and safety. This misinterpretation is why narcissists often brag, internally or externally, about winning over someone who is deeply empathic or spiritually aware. They take credit for access that was never theirs to claim. The empath's vulnerability, devotion, and surrender are freely given to someone they trust, someone who respects the sacredness of that energy. The narcissist does not understand the subtle difference between surrender rooted in trust and surrender rooted in domination. In their minds, the act of intimacy, of merging emotionally or spiritually, is an achievement, a reflection of skill or personal magnetism. They do not realize that what they encountered cannot be manufactured, coerced, or imitated. It exists only when the empath feels safe, seen, and honored. For the narcissist, this confusion creates a dangerous combination of arrogance and addiction. They may believe that the experience is repeatable, that they can obtain the same kind of connection with someone else, or that their charm or influence is what produced the intensity. They approach subsequent relationships with the same strategies: love bombing, spiritual or soulmate narratives, seductive attention, and manipulation, thinking they can recreate the feeling of being power over another person. But no matter how skillful or convincing they appear, the energy they encounter with an empath is unique. The vulnerability they experienced is tied to trust, devotion, and the empath's own sacred boundaries. When they try to replace the empath with someone else, they find that the same intensity cannot be replicated. It was never about conquest, it was about connection. This confusion between sacredness and power also explains why narcissists struggle emotionally after a separation from an empath. Unlike the empath, who may grieve, heal, and ultimately reclaim their energy, the narcissist often experiences obsession, longing, and fixation. They do not mourn the person themselves, they mourn the access to energy they cannot reproduce. The empath's sexual and spiritual presence has imprinted on them because it was authentic and irreplaceable. They cannot fabricate the same depth with another partner because no amount of charm, manipulation, or strategy can produce the genuine surrender and trust that was freely offered. The intensity of the connection continues to haunt them because they misunderstood it from the beginning. The empath's sacred energy is not just sexual, it is emotional, spiritual, and psychological. It carries the imprint of empathy, authenticity, and the capacity to bond on a soul level. This combination is not something that can be controlled, seduced, or duplicated. It is inherently aligned with openness, generosity, and truth. The narcissist experiences it as power because it affects them deeply and destabilizes their usual mechanisms of control. Their ego misinterprets the effect as domination when in reality it was a reflection of the empath's willingness to connect without ego-driven expectation. They mistake the magnetism of mutual vulnerability for a personal triumph, rather than recognizing it as a sacred exchange that exists only when one party is willing to give freely. This misperception also explains why narcissists can become obsessive. They chase what they cannot recreate. They attempt to hoover the empath back into the fold, to regain access to the energy that once sustained their fragile ego. They may try to replicate experiences, mimic gestures, or find new partners who appear similar in temperament or sensitivity. But nothing works because the essence of what they crave, the sacred, authentic presence of the empath, cannot be conjured artificially. Each attempt to recreate it reinforces their frustration, exposing the gap between their perception of power and the reality of the empath's unique energy. Interestingly, this confusion between sacred and power also influences how narcissists interpret consent and boundaries. When the empath sets limits or reclaims their energy, the narcissist often reacts with bewilderment, anger, or obsession. From their perspective, they believe that their previous access was proof of dominance. They cannot understand that access was contingent on trust, safety, and mutual alignment, not on conquest. The empath's withdrawal feels like betrayal or a threat to their ego because it breaks the illusion that they ever had control. They panic because the sacred energy they once mistook for power is no longer available, and no amount of coercion or manipulation can restore it. This dynamic also teaches a vital lesson for empaths. The energy you offer is sacred, not transactional. It is not a tool to demonstrate power or to test someone else's abilities. It is not meant to be consumed without respect. The narcissist's inability to distinguish between sacredness and power highlights their lack of understanding, empathy, and emotional maturity. They cannot honor what they cannot comprehend, and their addiction to your energy is a reflection of their incapacity, not your value. Moreover, recognizing this distinction empowers the empath to reclaim their agency. Understanding that the narcissist confuses sacred presence with power allows the empath to disengage without guilt or second guessing. The panic, obsession, or attempts to regain access that follow are evidence of the narcissist's internal void and their dependence on what cannot be artificially obtained. By holding firm in boundaries, detachment, and self-respect, the empath asserts the sanctity of their energy, preserving it for relationships rooted in genuine mutuality rather than consumption.